Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.
Good morning, Pastor. Welcome.
Hey, good morning, Danilo. Trust that you're doing well.
I am apologizing to you now that we don't have your drop. You just give us some time so we can finalize some of those things. We're making some changes.
Building on the construction. Improving to facilitate you. Okay, then I get you.
we're trying to make some improvements.
Good morning, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I trust that all is well, relatively well. I am pleased to know that when I say this, sometimes when you're being thankful for certain things, you have to be so careful these days, because I really want to say that we are thankful that we got spared from extreme weather. On the weekend there, we were expecting to have a storm. The Prime Minister did address the nation and talked about, getting prepared. And time after time, we go through this where we anticipate that certainly it's going to come our way. Mm-hmm. And then you wake up on the day and or you go to sleep the night and then you wake up the next morning and it has not come your way.
Right.
But the thing is, it went somewhere else, and we are in prayer for those that got rained out. Some people water damage and all kind of stuff. So, we are considerate of others, but I have to say that here in St. Vincent, considering our own vulnerability, I am always glad when we get spared. We just fixing roads, and you don't want, for there to be landslides and slippage and people losing houses and all of that. So every time we get spared, I am thankful. I hope that that we don't take these things for granted. That is not same old, that we go on with our day without reflecting on the fact that for whatever reason, stuff that could have happened didn't happen. We always are to have that kind of grateful mindset. That there are many other things like this that I think we are being spared in St. Vincent. Some who are people of faith put it down to divine purposes. Some who are just not people of faith will find other explanations for it, or it's just luck. But whether or not you are a person of faith or you just put it down to luck or chance, the point is at some point there ought to be some appreciation for the fact that, man, there's some bad stuff that could go down here that are not going down here in this vulnerable place. So I just wanted to say that and get that done.
I agree.
Yeah. So what's churning this morning?
Yes. So, Pastor, I want to get your perspective on lawyers who defend, and I'm sure you know the story of the pastor who allegedly raped the child. You would have seen. I don't
think it's allegedly.
Well,
because
he's guilty,
that,
right? He was charged, right? Okay. So, first, what's your take on that? Of course, you're a pastor, so I can't imagine what it's like.
From my take on that is absolutely not going to be a new take. Mm-hmm. You have heard me say on this radio, and the listeners have heard me say on this radio, that this thing is a crime. I actually said it is worse than murder.
Yes,
that's how strongly I feel about it. And I say that not from just an emotional perspective, Daniel. And you know me, I think you have listened to me over years, so, and you know me well enough to know that I try to think things through. And because in this matter, you have to give consideration to what I call the victimology. And again, this is the second time I'm making a reference to the victimology of sexual molestation, and particularly the sexual molestation of minors, and because there's wide spectrum of things that can be categorized as sexual molestation. Even some of it verbal, some of it just feeling, touching, inappropriate touching, and stuff like that. All of that comes under sexual molestation, but the rape, all right, incest. I'm identifying what I would, from my perspective, to be those that are particularly traumatic: rape and incest, pedophilia, which is a very dastardly thing to happen. The sex and interference with a minor. So those three are real interesting to read the victimology on those. Of course, each write-up has a different nuance, but in general, the sort of post-traumatic stress, the ruin to your life, when you do it to a child in particular, the larger body of psychology and analysis. If you read it, which I have taken my time to read some, although it is not entirely deterministic to say that a child who is molested at the age 5 or age 7 is absolutely bound to turn out in a particular way, sufficient longitudinal research has been done to show a particular trend in behaviors, self-hurt, self-harm, self-doubt, low self-esteem, permissive sexual behavior. It goes suicidal behavior, low achievement in school. It's a ruin to your life, basically. And again, my aim here is not to go through all of the different items in the victimology, but to point out some of the things, the nightmares, the shaking that you come around. Some children, if they were offended by bald-headed men, for the rest of their life, they have a distrust of all bald-headed men. It's a mess. So when you hear me say that it is a crime worse than murder, I mean it, and I think the penalty for this kind of stuff should be a penalty that is harsher than the penalty for murder. Mm-hmm. This is how strongly I feel about the thing. So without getting emotional, you ask me how I feel about it. It's wickedness to the highest degree.
And how do you feel about lawyers defending those persons who have aspirations to take up public office?
If a lawyer has aspirations to take up public office, is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. If he or she should defend?
Yes.
When you purport to, or you make that decision to take up public office, you are going to end up into some areas of crossovers and conflicts that might not necessarily gel well or look well for the optics of representing people. In your professional career, in the same way doctors are going to treat people, even if a guy comes in who has been shooting up the neighborhood and he comes in with gunshot wounds, the doctors sign an oath for the care of people, the Hippocratic Oath, and other ethical considerations within their practices that they're going to have to adhere to. So within the profession, you do what you do as a professional, as a psychologist, as a counselor. There's certain ethics of the profession that you will. People come to see me, for example. I know I'm going with this. People come and see me with a wide array of issues that they have. Okay, let me hedge around this, right? Some of the things that people come and see me about are deep and dark, okay, but I don't run them out of my office and stuff, because again, if I'm in what is called the skilled help or the helping professions, and you have pledged to help people, then you want to help people who need help. You don't run them. In the same way, if you're in the if you're in the law and you have signed off on certain things. And particularly in a country where even every accused is, can have a defense and is allowed to have a defense. And that's what lawyers are for. So if that's what you're doing, you do that, okay? And let the court decide if the man is guilty or innocent. Now, that is from the perspective of the lawyer and his lawyer professionals. But from the point of view of representing people, you have to understand that within your constituency, you are likely to have a large percentage of women Most places you have, the voting probably is either 50-50 or might even, be more women than men. Then what's going to happen when you know that a significant number of these, if we are to go by just raw statistics as elsewhere, where many women who don't report it have actually been molested in one form or the other, whether verbally, inappropriate touching, or even a few of them in the most violent of ways, they have been molested. You have to bear that in mind, that, that what would my constituents or my potential constituents think of me? This is the kind of man I am. This is the kind of woman I am. I'm going to defend this person for pay. And that's what it's being done for, It's being done for pay. All right? Unless you're doing it pro bono, which I don't know if it is being done pro bono, but I think most of the time it's being done for pay. So how does that sell, and what does the optics of that look like, to somebody who's voting? So you have to consider these things. I'm not calling it as a right or wrong issue in terms of defending somebody who is accused, okay? I am not doing that. I am discussing it from the point of view of the optics of how it looks.
Right.
When you have that clash that you want to do your job as a lawyer and you want to do your job as a constituency representative, there are going to be times when the optics of one is going to work against the efficacy in the other. And that's what this is.
If faced with a situation like that, what would you have done?
Excuse me?
What would you have done in a situation like that?
I'm not sure. If I were a lawyer?
Yes.
That is a loaded question, simply because the highest value I have, and I say this meaningfully, the highest value I have is my Christian principle and what I understand from the Bible. And there's going to be a clash of that with my work as a lawyer. If that's going to ever come into a time of clash and conflict, I know where I'm going to make my decision. There are other lawyers who might not have my biblical bias and my biblical basis. That person is entitled to a defense. They can go to another lawyer. But I have something from the Bible that says, if you or anyone, this is what Christ himself said, it's right there in the writ of God, in the word of God, if you or anyone else hurt one of these little ones. And I was very surprised that Christ used this kind of harsh language. Daniel, I think you know the Bible well enough to know what he said. He said, if you, and he was talking to religious people, if any of you hurt any of these little ones who believe in me, I tell you, it's better that they just take a stone, tie it around his neck, and go drown him somewhere. Now, that is really harsh language for a man of love to use. But such is his passion for children. He says, don't mess with children. It's better they take them and go carry them, tie them up in concrete, and drown them somewhere. Don't mess with the children. So if Christ could speak with such passion about messing with children, that gives me I don't even have to guess, that gives me a very, very clear indication. If Christ is against it and does not defend it, then I have to be against it, and I can't defend it either. So my position is very, very clear based on the statement of Christ where that is concerned.
All right. We have someone on WhatsApp saying something. Okay, Pastor, so I'm going to read it.
Yes, sure.
If a member of pastor's church goes to him and confesses, asking forgiveness for such a crime, what would you do?
That's an easy one. That's an easy one. Forgiveness is up to God. Okay? So we don't do confessions and forgiveness. We do skilled help where I walk people through their problem. I have a responsibility, which I have executed time and again, by the way. If those in authority listening know my voice, you know that I have done this time and again. This is not to dissuade people from coming to me, but there are certain in the counseling profession, there are certain occurrences, if they come to you, if you are aware of it, you have to report it.
Okay.
Daniel, I read to you from the Children Care and Adoption Act of 2010, I think it is. The Children Care and Adoption Act of 2010. 2010. And I read a particular thing that said to Daniel, I don't know if you recall, that there's a duty to report. Not just of pastors and all of that, but of other people. If you become aware of any, if a person has any knowledge or reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is in need of care or protection of any circumstance, you're supposed to report it without delay. A person who fails to report commits an offense that is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $5,000 or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 3 months. So there's what is called a duty to report. And there are other things outside of that. If a child comes to me showing physical abuse, belt beating and all of that kind of stuff, you have a duty to report. And not just the sexual things. You have a duty to report. So while there's confidentiality in counseling, there's also that which is legal, which while you maintain confidentiality, if certain things come before you, you can't cover it up. You have a duty to report. And certainly, to the person who asked the question, I will do the requisite reporting. I will leave the forgiving up to God.
Someone says, is it not written that you must confess to another and ask for forgiveness?
The forgiveness is, and we are all asked to forgive, by the way, in case that person is wondering, but we have to get our theology right. We have to forgive one another. The Bible says forgive one another. And even when people don't ask you to forgive them, you still should extend. The Bible says God will not forgive you if you don't forgive other people. In fact, our Father prayer, which people say, forgive us, Lord, as we forgive others who trespass against us. So we ought to forgive the people who wrong us. But the crime of incest and sexual molestation, while it is a crime against minors and against people, there's also a higher level or a higher order infraction, and it is an absolute disregard for God and God's creation. So not only do you need the forgiveness of others that you have wronged, you also need the forgiveness of God. And I can't, for people who trash God, man or woman or children made in the image of God, that's a grave matter with God. I can't forgive them for that. They have to face God and confess to God their absolute and utter disregard and the sickness that they have done in their act, and they have to ask God for forgiveness. So that person is right. You ask forgiveness of people that you have wronged, but when you come in violation of God's law, you need to ask forgiveness of God also.
And Pastor, this, I think, is he an assistant pastor? I think it is.
Yes, go ahead.
You think that counseling is needed for him?
I've said this and I've said it over and over again. People who commit these kinds of acts, by the way, this is not to excuse, this is just reality. Mm-hmm. In the same way, alcoholics drink because they're alcoholics, and people who have, there's a thing called mental sickness. And there's also a thing called preconditioning. Freud and other psychodynamic counselors understand that sometimes children go through abuses of their own in their childhood, and therefore, as adults, act out these things. There are myriad of reasons why we have pedophiles and other things. Chemical imbalances also produces certain reactions. I don't have time to go through all of that, but what I want to say is, when a man does something like this, it is clear that he is not normal. It's abnormal, and frankly speaking, he is sick. He really, really is sick. Something is wrong with him. More often than not, it is mental, but sometimes it's some physical thing, but more often than not, it's mental. That he is sick, and therefore, sick people need help. And if he is sick mentally, then he needs help, the requisite help, in that mental arena. I've said before, however, to clarify, I've said in cases where I've counseled people, not in matters of this, but for example, in matters of intimate partner violence, I've done some counseling in that, where a man is beating his woman. I always counsel for the separation. I don't tolerate that at all. So people listening to me have counseled, that is true. You say, yeah, that is true. he doesn't put. I don't keep a woman in a situation where she's abused by a man. I find ways in which I could kind of, where can you go? Where can we put you? Where safe? All of that. I mean, I don't care if you love of your life or you're married for 10, 15, 20 years. Get out from a situation where you are being beaten. But what I realized too is that it is a sickness in the man while he's doing this, and I've said this on the station before. The guy has to, if he's willing, the guy has to go through a process of counseling, a module, whatever therapy, whatever intervention, whether it's 8 weeks or 10 weeks, he has to go through that. If he shows progress, measurable progress by the end of that period of counseling, then you can have re-entry.
But how do you measure progress for something like that?
You asked me now about testing and indicators and all of that, which is another field of counseling. There are various there are various tests that I have a couple here that I use as indicators. You might be familiar, although this is not primarily a matter of specifics with respect to domestic abuse. One of the tests that I use to get indicators of personality and personal traits is the Myers-Briggs test, which is an extensive test, but there are other similar spin-offs from that I use. There are tendencies towards physical violence. There are tests that will give you that, right? You can do the before and after and see if a guy did this test. And when you're doing those tests, by the way, you have no idea what the indicators are. If I give you a test with 10, 20, 30 questions, you have no idea what the indicators are. So you can't even deliberately say, well, I will answer this because I know what he's looking for. I'll answer that. You just have to answer your best call because you don't know how I'm going to read that. And basically, at the end of the day, if I find that the person, the male, more often than not is a male, if I find that the male is responding well to the counseling, you might want to do a tentative re-entry. But again, that is to answer the question as to, you asked me if the guy is sick and if he's going to need help. People who do these things are sick and they need help. And with the right kind of help, you can avoid a repetition of these occurrences. But that doesn't change the damage that they have done, and they still have to answer for that. But at least you help them from, molesting somebody else. You understand? So, but go ahead.
I just really want to get in one more question, and we're definitely way out of time, but I just want to ask you about something we were discussing earlier concerning quarantine. There is a question of who should really pay for persons who are flying in now and quarantining in hotels, because it's mandatory. Yes, we're asking who should have to pay. Is it fair for these persons to have to travel here and then pay for hotel accommodation as their quarantine?
Daniel, an answer to that question depends on perspective. It really does. It depends on the level at which you want to discuss the question at. If you want to discuss the question from down in the weeds, out of the person's pocket, this person doesn't have an income, or, look at this person, they could hardly afford to come home, and now you're putting them there to go in hotel. If you discuss it at that level, you get a one kind of answer, frankly speaking, which seemed to evoke a kind of sympathy. Anecdotally, mind you, based from one person to the other, some situations might evoke more sympathy than others, and you will cry and scream, unfair, why should the person have to pay? Or why should I pay out of my taxpayers' money? Because they should know before they went overseas and want to come back home, they should know, they should have canceled their trip. My taxpayers' money should not be used for that. That's one level of arguing that. You'll get one answer, but then if you argue this from a higher order questioning, when I say higher order, from the perspective of a more national perspective, cost benefit to the nation, not cost benefit to the individual, which is what I referred to earlier, but cost benefit to the nation. What does it mean for one person coming in here and not properly quarantined, and to what extent should the government go all out to ensure whether the person has the money or not becomes irrelevant? To what extreme should the government go to make sure that everyone who is coming in here is quarantined in such a way that they're not let loose in the population to push the spread of the COVID. The government has to take all of the measures, and even if it means dipping into the tax dollars and doing it, the government has to do that because there's a higher principle. How much is the health of the nation worth? And I mean, look at the comparative analysis. The government is using your same tax dollars to do many other things. And I think that using the tax dollars to protect the nation, if it comes to that, it is a much more commendable thing to do than, I could give you 5 other things that can be done with tax dollars, but I won't. But I think it's a much more commendable thing to protect the nation and to keep in check the spread of COVID by quarantining people and doing it responsibly. If the government is utilizing tax dollars to do that, I think that is highly commendable. I'm not sure that they will go in that direction, but I am saying if it comes to it, I won't have an argument. Frankly speaking, how much of a choice anyway do I have about the expenditure over my tax dollars? I don't know. It is not a personal thing anymore when someone pays tax, okay? Person X or person Y or person Z. When you pay tax, it's not a personal thing anymore. Your money has gone into the government coffers. It now becomes the nation's funds to be expended in ways in which those in government see fit. And I actually think that the protection of the nation is a priority thing, and therefore quite worthy of the expenditure of tax dollars if it comes to it.
All right, Pastor, thank you. We appreciate your opinion always.
Thank you, Daniel.
Have a great day, okay?
Best day to everyone, bye.
All right.
Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.